Subscribe if you want to hear the stories no one else dares to tell. I was 5 when they first shut the door. Not just any door, the basement door. The one that groaned like it remembered every time it had swallowed me before. The one that locked from the outside. I remember the sound more than the feeling. The thick click of the bolt sliding into place. Final, heavy, like a sentence being handed down. Like the world above had decided I no longer belonged to it. It was cold down there, always, even in summer. Even when the sun outside baked the fields and made the windows sweat, the basement stayed damp and still. Like time didn't move there, like light had forgotten it. They called it my corner, as if giving it a name made it mine, as if naming the place where you leave a child alone for hours, sometimes days, makes it anything less than what it is. Punishment, they said, for lying, for crying, for spilling milk, for speaking when I wasn't spoken to. For asking where my real mother went. That one got me 2 nights. I learned early that asking questions cost more than keeping quiet, so I stopped asking. I started counting instead. Cracks in the concrete, drips from the pipes, the seconds between footsteps above me, how long it took for hunger to become numbness, how long it took for numbness to become normal. No one ever told me how long I'd be down there. That was part of the game. It made the air sharp. It made sleep dangerous. Because sometimes they opened the door without warning, and if I was asleep, if I wasn't standing, hands folded, eyes down, they'd say I hadn't learned, and the door would close again. So I learned to sleep with one eye open, to keep my ears trained for the sound of the bolt, to hold my breath every time the stairs creaked. That was love, they told me, correction, discipline, God's way, but God never came down there, not once, no light, no voice. Just me and the concrete and the silence that got so loud it screamed. They said children forget. That memory doesn't hold on to what happens too early. But they lied. I remember everything. The texture of the floor under my knees. The way mildew tastes when it settles in your throat. The way hope starts to rot when it doesn't get fed. I didn't forget. I just learned not to speak of it. Until now. Because now, after all these years, I'm tired of carrying the weight of their silence. Tired of pretending that I came from a home instead of a cell. They always said, don't tell anyone, they won't believe you anyway. But I don't need belief anymore. I just need to say it, out loud, so it doesn't die inside me. Let me tell you what it means to be raised in the dark. Let me show you what it takes to survive the kind of childhood that doesn't end when you grow up. Let me tell you what they did. They said it was to make me strong. That's the thing people like to tell themselves, isn't it? That the hurt they give is a gift, that bruises are a kind of preparation, that silence is character building, that fear in small doses keeps a child obedient. But fear didn't make me obedient. It made me watchful. It made me memorize the shape of their shadows under the crack of the basement door. It made me catalog their footsteps by weight and speed and mood. It made me learn to hear the difference between angry silence and dangerous silence, the kind that came just before the door opened, the kind that meant more than cold, the kind that meant hands. I didn't understand the rules. Not at first. They changed too often. Sometimes the punishment was for crying, sometimes for not crying, sometimes just for being seen. My father was not a large man, but the basement made him huge. When the light from the stairwell sliced through the dark, he filled it like a monster out of a child's book, but there were no books down there, no pages, no stories except the ones I wrote in my mind to stay alive. At first I'd whisper to myself, fairy tales I made up where basements were castles, and I was a brave girl locked away by witches, where someone came for me, a mother, a knight, a god. But no one ever came. So the stories changed, they grew quiet, then bitter, then disappeared altogether. Eventually even imagination feels like betrayal, because it reminds you of what you don't have. They fed me when they remembered, cold leftovers scraped into a metal bowl, the kind dogs eat from. Once I asked for a fork, just once. The bowl was taken away. I didn't eat again for 2 days. I learned then that asking was dangerous. that wanting was worse. And so I didn't. I chewed slowly, silently, whatever was given, and when nothing was given, I waited. The body adapts to hunger, but the heart learns other hungers. For touch, for warmth, for someone to look at you and see you, but I was invisible to them. An inconvenience. A lesson. A symbol of my mother's shame, of her running away. They never spoke her name, only spat it like a curse when they thought I couldn't hear. She left that thing behind. A curse, that's what she is. Just like her mother, rotten. I didn't even know what my mother looked like. There were no photos. Only her ghost, filling the house in all the places they hated me. The basement was her punishment, but I was the one sentenced to it. I think the worst part wasn't the dark. It was the hours before they locked me in. The waiting, the guessing. The way they'd smile too sweetly over breakfast, and I'd know something was coming, because they always smiled before the hurting started. It was never rage, not wild, not out of control. It was method, it was ritual, like they believed they were doing something sacred. Spare the rod, spoil the child. They quoted that a lot. They believed in rods, not the wooden kind, the kind that left no marks if you were careful. Hands, words. Isolation, and the stories they told others about me, how I was difficult, how I lied and stole and took pleasure in rebellion. No one questioned them, because who questions a God-fearing couple who takes in the child of a runaway daughter, who gives her a roof and food and clothes? No one asked why the child looked smaller every year, why she flinched when you raised your voice, why she never laughed. They said I was shy, timid but sweet, such a quiet little thing. Quiet, yes, because I had learned that my voice was a weapon, but not one that protected me, one that got turned against me. Every word became evidence, every look became defiance. So I kept my head down, eyes low, breath shallow, and still it wasn't enough. Because it was never about obedience, it was about control. And children, no matter how small, carry something wild in them, something bright. They wanted to kill that brightness, and maybe for a while they did. But something always remained. Even buried under all the silence, all the cold, all the days where I forgot what sunlight felt like, something remained, a flicker so small it barely counted as hope. But it was mine, not given to me, not granted, not conditioned on whether I behaved or prayed the right way. It lived in me like a tiny ember in the corner of a burnt-out room, and it refused to die. That ember kept me alive the night the stairs creaked differently. It was years later, I don't know how many. Time had stopped mattering. I had stopped growing taller. But my bones still ached from cold. My skin was pale like the walls, and my voice barely made sound when I spoke aloud, which wasn't often. But I remember the sound of that creak. It wasn't the father, not the mother's hurried, fearful tread either. It was something else. Lighter, softer, unfamiliar. I sat up from the mat on the floor, a piece of burlap I wasn't allowed to call a blanket, and I waited. The bolt slid open slowly, almost cautiously, not like them. They were never cautious. And then I saw her. She must have been 16, maybe 17. Brown hair, eyes like mine, a face I didn't recognize and somehow did. She looked at me like I was real, like she'd seen a ghost. And maybe she had. I found out later, years later, that she was my cousin, the daughter of the father's estranged brother. She had come to stay for the summer, a family reconnection of sorts. She hadn't known I existed. But she had heard the rumors, a mistake, a burden, a strange child they took in. No photos, no visits, always in her room when guests came. She had heard the basement door lock once, then again. She had asked questions. She wasn't supposed to, but she did, and she opened the door. She stood there blinking at the smell, her hand shaking around the doorknob, and I didn't move. I was sure it was a trick, that if I stood, I would be punished for hope. But she stepped forward, whispered my name, and I started to cry. Not loud. Not like in the movies, not the kind of cry people notice. It was like air escaping from a broken balloon, soft, slow, unstoppable. She knelt, put her sweater over my shoulders, and held my face. No one had touched me like that in years, not kindly, not without judgment. I flinched, but I didn't pull away, and she said just 3 words. "You are real." That's what broke me, not the pain, not the hunger, not the years of darkness. Those words, because until that moment I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was a punishment made flesh, a memory of a mistake. A silence turned into skin, but she saw me. She ran back upstairs and called someone, I still don't know who. I don't remember the ride in the car, the flashing lights, the way the father shouted, the mother wept, all too late. What I remember is the moment the door opened and stayed open, the light that poured in. It hurt. I blinked like a newborn animal, wincing at the brightness I'd stopped believing in. They called me a victim. A case, an investigation. They used words I didn't understand, words that sounded more like diagnosis than care. But she called me real. And I held on to that. They placed me in a home. Then another. Then another. They fed me, clothed me, talked about healing and progress and goals. But healing is not a staircase. It's a maze, a loop, a series of moments where you forget and remember all over again. I learned to walk in daylight, to eat with people, to speak without looking for permission. But the basement never truly left me. Even now, as I sit in a chair by the window, watching the sun set over a field that no longer cages me, I still hear the click of the bolt sometimes when it's quiet, still catch myself standing too still, listening for footsteps, still flinch when someone says, "Be grateful they gave you a home," because it wasn't a home. It was a tomb, and I lived in it, and I survived it, and I escaped it. But I am not here to be your inspiration. I am not here to wrap this in forgiveness and pretty language. I am here to tell you what they did was wrong, what they did was evil, and I am done pretending otherwise. They never said sorry. They never saw a jail cell. They moved on, started over, told stories that painted them as martyrs of a troubled child, and the world, as it often does, let them. But I remember every detail, every word, every moment in the dark. And remembering is power, because memory is how we reclaim what was taken. And I remember everything, even now, with my hands wrinkled and slow, with my back curved by the weight of years and grief. I remember it all with a clarity that frightens me. They told me I would forget, that children always do, but I didn't, not because I clung to the pain, but because the pain clung to me. It etched itself into the marrow of my bones, into the way I move through rooms, into the way I hesitate before closing a door behind me, into the way I watch shadows. Still, just in case they move. I tried once to tell someone, a therapist, nice woman, soft eyes. She asked me about my childhood with that voice people use when they're bracing for something tragic but manageable. I said one sentence, just one. I grew up in a basement. She nodded, waiting, so I said another. I didn't leave it until I was almost a teenager. And then I watched her mouth go dry. Her pen froze mid-word. She didn't know what to say. That was the problem with the truth. It didn't fit inside people's expectations. It didn't fit on their forms or inside their neat boxes labeled trauma. Because when you say basement, they think of punishment, not residence. When you say locked, they think of timeouts, not years. When you say parents, they think of mistakes, not monsters. I stopped seeing her after that. Not out of anger, but out of mercy. For both of us. Some stories are too heavy to carry unless you've lived them. And even then, barely. So I carried mine alone again, for decades. Until one day, a girl knocked on my door. She was from a nearby college, studying sociology, or maybe psychology. She wanted to collect oral histories of survival. Had heard about me from someone, though I never found out who. She was nervous, kind, wore a sweater too big for her frame, like armor. She asked if I'd talk to her, said I didn't have to answer anything I didn't want to. I almost said no, but something in her face, something familiar, made me open the door wider. We sat at my kitchen table. She turned on a recorder, set it gently between us like a question. And I told her, not everything at once, not in a rush, but slowly, steadily, piece by piece, like sweeping glass off a floor, like peeling wallpaper to see what the wall had hidden. She didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She cried once, but quietly. Let the tears fall without shame. Didn't try to comfort me, which I appreciated. And when I finished, hours later, she reached across the table and took my hand. She said, I believe you. 3 words. And it was like hearing I love you for the first time. Not because it was emotional, but because it was safe. Because finally someone knew the story and didn't try to soften it, didn't try to redeem it, didn't ask, did they mean well? Didn't wonder, did you ever forgive them? She just believed me. And that was enough. She left that night with her recorder full. But I felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but lighter. Like for the first time in my life, the story belonged to me, not to them, not to the silence, not to the fear, to me. And now, when I walk through this house small, quiet mine, I speak the story aloud, to no one, to everyone, sometimes into the mirror, sometimes to the moon. Sometimes just to remind myself that it happened and that it's over. I still sleep with a light on, still keep a glass of water by the bed just in case. But I am not in the basement anymore. Not in my body, not in my mind. I live above ground, with windows, with warmth, with my name on the mailbox and my memories in my voice. And when I go, because I will go soon, I want this story to remain. Not for pity, not for vengeance, but so no one can ever say again, I didn't know things like that happen. Or worse, I didn't think they happened here. They do. They did. They still might. But they don't have to stay hidden. Not anymore. Not if we tell. Not if we listen. Not if we stop flinching at the truth. I am not a mystery. I am not a myth. I am not a survivor of the dark. I am its witness. And now so are you. They always thought the basement was the worst of it. And I let them think that, because it's easier to explain a locked door than an open one. Easier to say I was trapped than to say I was free and still afraid. There's a strange kind of safety in being caged. At least then you know what keeps you. But what do you do when the cage is gone, and the world still feels like a place you're not supposed to belong? I had just turned 15 when they let me out for good. No ceremony, no apology, just a statement, delivered over cold oatmeal. You're old enough now to know better. No more foolishness, no more punishments. We expect you to behave like a young lady. A young lady. After all those years in the dark, they expected me to step into the light like it hadn't already burned me. They sent me to school, or rather they let me go. A small private place, run by a church. Uniforms, rules, eyes everywhere. They didn't want me educated. They wanted me watched. And yet it was there, in that sharp, echoing building of stained glass and hushed voices, that I met her. Eva. She wasn't like the other girls. She didn't flinch when I didn't talk. She didn't mock the way I avoided mirrors or how I counted my steps between rooms. She just sat beside me one day at lunch and said, "You look like you're always somewhere else. Can I sit with you in there?" And I didn't know how to answer, because no one had ever asked to be part of my silence before. But I nodded, and that was the beginning of a different kind of story. Not one without pain, no, not that. But one where, for the first time, I wasn't the only one carrying it. She had stories too, not like mine, but sharp in their own ways. A mother who drank, a father who prayed too loudly and never listened. She knew what it was to be invisible in plain sight, to scream without sound. We became shadows together, moving through the school like a pair of unanswered questions. And sometimes, when the teachers weren't watching, we'd run, just run. through alleys, across quiet streets, to a hill just outside town where the wind didn't care who we were, and we'd lie on our backs, side by side, watching clouds, pretending we were somewhere else. She made me laugh, not often, not easily, but enough to remind me I had a mouth that wasn't only for apologies. And she listened. God, she listened, not like a therapist, not like someone trying to fix me, just like someone who believed me before I even finished speaking. The first time I told her about the basement, she didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just said, "They don't deserve you," and held my hand like that meant something. It did. But nothing good lasts forever, does it? Because secrets have gravity, and mine were heavy, too heavy. One night I didn't come home. We had found an abandoned greenhouse past the tracks, glass shattered, vines taking over. It felt like us. We sat there in the dusk, our knees touching, our hands buried in soil like roots. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I let myself feel safe, too safe. Time slipped, and by the time I walked through the front door, they were waiting. He didn't hit me. That wasn't his way. He preached and punished, not with fists, with exile. I was banished from the house, not physically. No, that would have drawn attention, but emotionally, spiritually. I became unclean. They told the pastor I was rebellious, fallen, lost, and suddenly I was being sent away to a reform home for girls like me, girls who questioned, girls who ran, girls who touched other girls. I never saw Eva again. No goodbye, no closure, just a memory of her voice saying, "If they ever take you away, I'll find you." But she never did. Or maybe she tried, maybe she couldn't, maybe they kept her from me too. And so I went to a place with clean walls and dirty rules, where girls disappeared for days if they cried too loudly, where scripture was carved into your days like commandments you couldn't argue. There I learned a different kind of silence, not the cold of the basement, but the burn of forced repentance. They tried to shame the truth out of me, tried to make me say I was wrong, that my memories were lies, that the dark had been my fault. But I knew better now, because someone had looked me in the eyes and believed me, and no one could unmake that. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I endured, like I always had. But I promised myself, if I ever got out again, I wouldn't stay quiet, not forever. And one day I did get out, but not because someone came, because I turned 18, and they had no more use for me, no more control. So they let me go, thinking I had nowhere to run. But I had something better than shelter. I had memory, and memory, when held with enough fire, becomes purpose. Let me continue. They didn't give me anything when I left. No suitcase, no money, not even a blessing. Just a door that opened behind me and closed too quickly. I walked for hours. No destination, only forward. The soles of my shoes wore thin by nightfall, and I slept behind a church that locked its doors at dusk. That was the first lesson of freedom. It doesn't come with comfort. It comes with wind and hunger and the terrifying realization that now every choice is yours to make, even the ones that hurt. I found work in a diner 2 towns over, under the table, no questions asked. I scrubbed floors, washed dishes, burned my fingers on grease I couldn't afford to flinch from. They paid me in tips and leftover soup. It was more than I had ever had. I rented a room the size of a closet above a pawn shop. The wallpaper peeled like old skin. The window didn't open, but it was mine. The second lesson of freedom. You measure it in inches, not miles. I learned to be alone, not the lonely kind. I'd known that all my life. No, this was different. This was choosing it. Choosing not to answer every phone that rang. Choosing not to chase every kindness like a starving thing. Choosing to sit with my own quiet and not be devoured by it. I started writing things down. In a small notebook I bought with stolen coins from a tips jar. Things I remembered, things I feared I'd forget. I wrote Eva's name 10 times on the first page, as if seeing it would summon her, as if repetition could hold something in place. I never stopped wondering what happened to her, whether she waited, whether she thought I had abandoned her. maybe that's the hardest kind of grief. Grief with no grave, no goodbye, just absence. Still, I lived. I learned how to open a bank account, how to file taxes, how to lie at job interviews when they asked about family. I found small joy in small things. The smell of clean laundry, the sound of a match striking, the weight of my own name said without shame. And then one day the third lesson came. You never really outrun the past. You just stop letting it drive. It was a Wednesday, rainy, a slow shift at the diner, and there she was, not Eva, her. The mother, older, thinner, eyes like pits. She sat at the counter like any other customer, ordered tea, didn't look at me. But I knew, my body knew, the way it tensed without warning, the way my throat closed. I wanted to scream, to throw the kettle at her feet and shout, "Do you remember what you did?" But I didn't. I poured the tea, placed it in front of her, and said, "Sugar's in the jar." She blinked, and for a moment I wondered if she recognized me at all. If maybe time had erased my face from her memory the way she had once tried to erase me from her house. But then, a flicker, the smallest shift in her jaw, the barest tightening of her hand around the teacup. She knew. She didn't speak. Not at first. She just stared at the steam, rising between us like it might hold a version of the past she could live with. I stood behind the counter, hands resting on the cold steel edge, my breath even, steady, trained. She finally spoke. "You look well." That was it. Not a question, not an apology, just those 3 words, as if commenting on the weather. I nodded once. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. Because I had learned how to be civil without being silent. Because I had earned the right to stand in that moment without shaking. She took a sip, winced at the heat, set the cup down. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "As opposed to where?" I asked quietly. "Still in the basement?" Her eyes dropped, not from shame, more like inconvenience. Like she didn't want to have this conversation. But I did. "I remember everything," I said. "I want you to know that, in case you still tell yourself otherwise." She didn't answer, just sat there, wrapped in the clothes of an old woman who still carried too much cruelty in her bones to admit it. I didn't wait for her to say more. I walked away, back to the kitchen, back to the smell of eggs and coffee and oil, back to the life I had built, not out of forgiveness, but out of survival. She left without finishing her tea, and I never saw her again, but I still remember the sound of the door closing behind her, not like a slam, not like anger, like relief, like a chapter turned, like the basement door finally locking behind her this time, and me on the outside, in the light, where I belonged. I went home that night with a strange kind of quiet in my chest. Not the kind that comes from being silenced. I'd lived with that one before. No, this was different. This was a clean quiet, a kind of stillness that made space. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, the one with the chipped corner and the one chair that still wobbled. I lit a candle, not for light, but for memory. I didn't believe in much anymore, not in the way people wanted me to, but I believed in marking moments. And this one felt like the closing of something old and buried. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for her. Not for the woman who had let the worst happen and then dared to act like I'd survived by accident. Instead, I opened the notebook again, the one I used to write in when the walls felt too close. The pages were worn now, the ink faded in places, but I knew every line. I had written my past into it, one truth at a time. And that night, I added one more. She saw me again, and this time I didn't flinch. It wasn't poetry, but it was real. In the morning I opened the curtains all the way, let the light fall across the floor, across my hands, across the years. I brewed coffee, not out of routine, but out of choice. That was something I had learned, that doing small things on your own terms rewrites the story a little bit each day. I took my cup to the window and watched the neighbors walk their dogs, their children, their heavy bags of groceries, life moving on in 100 invisible ways. And I thought of Ava. I never stopped. Sometimes in the quiet I could still hear her laugh, still feel the way her shoulder would brush mine when we sat on the hill, daring the sky to swallow us. I didn't know if she ever looked for me again. But I carried her anyway. In my words, in my stillness, in every step I took away from the girl they tried to bury. Because that's what they never understood. I was never buried, only planted. And what they tried to silence now blooms in me. Some nights, when sleep doesn't come, and the wind outside hums like it used to in the cracks of the basement walls, I sit up in bed and trace the lines of my own story with my fingers. Not literally, there are no scars to follow, no visible map. But my body remembers. Every inch of me carries echoes. My back remembers the cold of concrete. My knees remember the ache of stillness. My hands remember the weight of nothing. But they also remember holding the pen, holding the cup, holding the door open for someone else. Just once, years later, when I saw a girl not much older than I had been. She walked into the diner with sleeves too long and eyes too old. She didn't speak, just sat in the corner like she was trying to make herself invisible. I brought her hot soup without asking what she wanted. She didn't thank me. She didn't need to. I knew that silence too well. She came back the next day, and the next. And little by little, I saw her loosen. She would nod, sometimes smile. Then one day, she spoke. "Why are you nice to me?" I told her, "Because someone should have been nice to me." She blinked like she didn't understand, but she would. We all understand eventually what it means to be failed, and what it means to be found even briefly, even imperfectly. That girl became a woman, got a job, a place, a rhythm. Sometimes she still visits, brings flowers, asks how I'm feeling, if I need help carrying groceries, if I'm eating enough. She doesn't know everything, but she knows enough, and sometimes that's more than we can ask for. In time, I began to understand that I hadn't been cursed with memory. I had been entrusted with it, that telling the story when I was ready was a kind of resistance, a kind of rebellion against the idea that some things are too ugly to speak aloud, because that's how they win. With silence, with shame, with that sick kind of quiet that teaches you to look away. But I won't look away. Not anymore. Not from the girl I used to be, not from the woman I became, not from the world that failed me, then changed just enough to let me live in it on my own terms. I don't forgive them. That surprises people sometimes. They ask me as if it's the natural end to every story of pain. Did you forgive them? No, I didn't. Because forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned. And they never earned it. What I gave them was absence. A clean severing, a life lived without them. That is its own kind of peace. And now, near the end of all this, when my hands are slower and my breath shorter, I find that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or thunder. It settles quietly in the bones, like warmth after a storm, like morning light through thin curtains. I write now more than ever, not in that first notebook, I filled that one long ago, but in newer ones. I keep them stacked in a small wooden box by my bed. No titles, no dates, just truth. And someday maybe someone will read them. Maybe that girl I once fed soup to will find them and understand why I looked at her the way I did, why I sat with her without asking questions, why I let her speak or not speak and never pushed. Because that's the only way we break the chain, not by pretending the past was softer, but by refusing to pass the sharp edges forward. That is what survival means to me, not just enduring, but stopping the hurt where it tried to grow again. I am not proud of all the choices I made, but I am proud that I'm here, that I stayed, that I made something from nothing, that I turned silence into story and pain into proof. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been if none of it had happened, if there had been no basement, no locked doors, no cold nights of unanswered prayers, if there had been warmth instead of fear, if someone had held me when I cried instead of punishing the tears, if someone had looked me in the eyes and said, "You are safe, you are loved, you belong here." But then I stopped myself, because wondering who you could have been is a trap for people like me. It sounds gentle, like a lullaby, but it's a blade in disguise. It asks you to mourn the version of yourself the world refused to allow. It keeps you reaching backward into a place where no one ever came to rescue you. So no, I don't ask that anymore. I focus on who I became in spite of them. Not polished, not whole, but real. And being real, I've found, is more powerful than being perfect. There were years-long years where I thought being broken made me unworthy of love. I kept people at arm's length. I flinched when kindness came too close. I walked away from anything that looked like softness, because I'd learned too early that softness could turn on you without warning. But then I met someone, not in the storybook way, not with violins or slow-motion glances. He was just a man who delivered the mail. He was quiet, polite. He whistled when he walked, and he always looked people in the eye. For months, we didn't speak more than 5 words at a time, but I noticed the way he placed the letters gently on the doorstep, the way he never crumpled the corners, like the contents mattered. One day it rained. I watched him from the window, no umbrella, no coat. He was soaked. I opened the door. "You'll catch cold," I said. He smiled. "Too late for that." He stepped under the awning and looked around. "This your house?" he asked. I nodded. "Nice porch." We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain. Then he said, "Do you like soup?" I didn't know what to say. He added, "I make too much. I always make too much." That night we sat in my kitchen eating lentil soup from mismatched bowls. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Just told me about his sister's dog and how much he hated traffic and how every time he tried to grow tomatoes, the squirrels got to them first. He made me laugh, not because he was trying to be funny, but because he wasn't trying at all. He was just kind, and it felt revolutionary. We became friends. Then something more. Slowly, carefully. The first time he touched my hand, I didn't flinch. That's when I knew. He never asked about the past, but he held space for it, as if he knew some people carry a different kind of gravity. And one morning, years later, when we were planting herbs on the porch, he turned to me and said, "You don't talk much about what came before. You don't have to. But if ever you want to, I'll be here." And I did. Eventually. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And he didn't try to fix it, didn't pity me. He just listened and said, "You're stronger than they ever deserved." We never married. I didn't need the ceremony. I had my name, my home, my story. But we shared dinners and books and morning coffee for over 20 years, until the day he didn't wake up. It was quiet, kind, like him. I buried him under the oak tree in the back, the one that leans just slightly, like it knows what it means to survive wind. And every spring when the blossoms fall, I sit out there with a cup of tea and I talk to him. Sometimes I read him passages from my notebooks. Other times I sit in silence, because some things don't need words. They just need presence, like love, like memory, like the act of staying. And that, I've learned, is the final kind of freedom. To stay, to choose to remain, to live not just in spite of the story but within it, on your own terms, because the past may shape you, but it does not own you. Not anymore. Some afternoons I take the long way home. There's a trail behind the neighborhood where the trees grow close together, and if you walk it far enough, you'll reach the edge of a shallow river. Not many people go there anymore. The younger ones like noise and movement, but I like the hush of the woods. The way the water speaks in low murmurs, soft and constant, like a voice that's never run out of patience. That's where I go when the weight comes back. Because yes, it still does. People think healing is a ladder step by step, one direction only. But it isn't. Healing is a spiral, a circle. You return again and again to old wounds, but each time you carry something new, maybe a bit more strength, maybe just the knowledge that you've survived this visit before. I sit on the same flat rock every time. Its surface is cracked and lopsided, perfect in a way, just like me. I bring a blanket, sometimes a book, always a pen. I watch the current. I breathe. And I remember. Not because I want to, because I need to. There's power in remembering on your terms. Not when the nightmares come. Not when someone else demands your story. But when you choose to bring it into the light. I think of that girl I once was. The one in the basement. The one who learned to keep still. To shrink. To vanish. I tell her, I see you. Not, you'll be okay. Not, it's over now. Just that. I see you. Because sometimes that's all we ever wanted. Not rescue, not revenge. Just to be seen. To have someone notice the pain and not look away. I whispered to her across the years, you were never wrong for crying. You were never weak for surviving. You were never too much. You were never not enough. And the strange thing is, sometimes I feel her hear me. I know it sounds foolish, but maybe memory works both ways. Maybe the past isn't only something that haunts. Maybe it can be comforted too. Maybe when we speak kindly to our old selves, something in us shifts, not erases but releases. I don't know. I just know that every time I speak to her, something loosens in my chest, a knot I didn't realize I was holding. So I speak. Not out loud, not in words others can hear, but in presence, in patience, in the act of staying on that stone while the river moves around me and the trees hold their breath and the light filters through leaves like tiny promises. This is what peace looks like now, not forgetting, not pretending, but choosing to carry the story with dignity, to plant it like a seed instead of burying it like a shame. And I've watched it grow. The girls who come to my door now are different. Some come for advice, some come just to sit, but all of them carry something. You can see it in their shoulders, in the way they enter a room, in how quickly they scan for exits. And I offer them tea, I offer them space. I offer them the truth if they want it. Not all of it, not all at once, just enough to say, you're not alone. You never were, even in the dark. And if they ask, I tell them about the rock by the river. Some of them go. Some of them come back and say, I sat there. I think I heard something. And I smile. Because maybe they did. Maybe the past is listening. Maybe the broken places are waiting for us to return with gentler hands. I don't believe in miracles. Not the flashy kind. Not the ones that erase pain with a single breath. But I believe in moments. Small, quiet ones. A girl at your table. A stranger's kindness. A name whispered to the wind. Moments where the world turns slightly and something long buried stretches toward the sun. And isn't that a kind of miracle too? Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to tell it all. Not because I forget. I remember everything. Every sound. Every silence. Every time I wasn't believed. Every time I swallowed a scream to survive. But memory is a strange creature. It doesn't live in order. It doesn't care for logic. It arrives like rain, sudden, relentless, sometimes soft. So when the girls ask me, how did you get through it? I never know what to say first. Was it the day I learned how to sleep without fear? The first morning I made breakfast just for myself and ate it slowly? The first time I really laughed, and didn't feel guilty for it? Or was it the smallest moment of all? When I caught my own reflection in the mirror and didn't turn away, maybe it was all of them. Maybe survival isn't a single choice, but 1,000 quiet decisions made in the shadow of what was done to you. I tell them that healing is not a ladder, it's a garden. Some things bloom early, some take years, some seeds don't sprout until the second season or the third, and that's okay. You tend the soil, you show up with water, you learn what grows in your light. I never had children of my own. Not because I didn't want them, but because I didn't trust myself to be what they needed. For years I thought that made me less of a woman. I watched others cradle newborns, watched them tuck curls behind small ears and whisper lullabies. And I wondered if I had missed the one thing that might have saved me. But now I see it differently. I mother in other ways, with my hands, with my eyes, with the softness I offer to the ones who come after me. And they come. God, they come. Not always in tears, sometimes just with silence. A look that says, please don't ask me to explain. And I never do. I've learned that story only rises when it's ready. I keep my home open, not like a shelter. I'm no saint, but like a harbor. A place where the winds calm down for a while, where you can sleep without shoes on, where no one touches you unless you ask. They sit with me at dusk on the porch where the roses have overgrown the rails. They drink tea. They ask small questions. How long have you lived here? Why do you wear that ring? Do you believe in God? And I answer honestly, always honestly. I tell them that I've lived here long enough for the ghosts to get bored, that the ring belonged to no one. I bought it myself when I realized I didn't need someone else to mark my worth. And God, I say, I believe in light, in warmth, in the voice inside that says, keep going, even when everything else says stop. Sometimes they cry, not because of what I say, but because someone said it without asking for anything in return. That's the part that always breaks them, the kindness, because it's so rare. And when you've lived without it, it feels dangerous. I know, I remember, but I give it anyway, because someone has to, and because in some small way I think it heals me too, to give what I never got, to offer what I once begged for in the dark. I keep a drawer full of letters. Some are scribbled on torn napkins. Some typed with no return address. Some written with shaking hands, the ink smeared by tears. They all say the same thing in different ways. Thank you. I didn't know how much I needed to be seen. And I keep them, not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that truth matters, that stories echo, that even the most broken voice can build a bridge. There's one letter I wrote myself. I never sent it. Never meant to. It's addressed to the girl I was. It says, I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry no one came sooner. But I'm here now. I'm listening. And I believe you. I keep it at the back of the drawer, folded neatly, waiting, like me. One evening, just as the sun had started melting into the trees and the light turned gold in the way it only does once a day, a girl named Lena showed up at my door. She couldn't have been more than 17 bare arms, scuffed shoes, eyes like storm clouds. She didn't knock, just stood there. I'd seen her walking the edge of the neighborhood before, always with her hood up, always with the posture of someone bracing for impact. I opened the door. She didn't speak. I didn't ask. I simply stepped aside. She sat at my table and picked at the edge of a napkin like it might unravel into something else. I made her tea, cinnamon and honey, and put a bowl of soup in front of her. She didn't touch it at first, just stared at the steam, the way it curled up like something trying to leave. Eventually she said, I don't think I belong anywhere. I said, neither did I. And that was the start. Lena came back the next night. And the next. And for weeks after that. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she didn't. Once she brought me a rock she found by the train tracks. It was smooth and pink and shaped like a heart. It reminded me of you, she said. I asked why. Because it's tough, she replied, but still soft in the middle. I nearly wept. We never talked about what drove her here, not in detail. I didn't need it. Her silence was loud enough. I could read the way she jumped at sudden noises, the way she never let her back face the door, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, as if waiting for the moment I'd turn cruel. She was waiting for the rules to change. They never did, and little by little she started to trust it. She stayed longer each time, helped with dishes, swept the porch, read out loud from the books on my shelf, stumbling over big words and laughing at herself in the process. One day she asked, How do you know who to trust? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, You don't. You just learn who makes you feel like yourself when you're around them. She nodded slowly. Like you. And I realized something then, something I hadn't known I was waiting for. I had become the woman I used to dream about. Not flawless, not fearless, but safe. The kind of woman who opens the door and means it. The kind who listens without a clock. The kind who makes tea and never asks, "What did you do?" Because we've all been blamed too many times for what was done to us. I became her, and I didn't even notice it happening. It wasn't some grand transformation, no thunder, no applause, just small choices repeated over years, just breath and work and surviving long enough to become someone I could be proud of. Lena left town eventually. I knew she would. I think I always knew. She hugged me on her last day. Tight, like someone anchoring herself before the leap. "I love you," she said, muffled into my sweater. I didn't say it back right away. I held her, felt her breath steady, and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be someone you could love." Because that's what it felt like. A gift. We both cried, quietly, like it was a language only we knew. After she left, the house felt bigger. Not empty, just full of echoes. I kept the heart-shaped rock on my windowsill. It catches the morning sun just right. Sometimes it glows. I think of all the girls like her, like me, wandering, waiting, hoping that someone, somewhere will see past the silence and say, "You're safe here." And maybe they will. Maybe someone like me will open a door. Or maybe it'll be you, because that's the other thing I've learned. You don't need to be healed to be helpful. You don't need to be whole to hold someone. You just need to be willing, to stay soft, to stay open, to be the proof that gentleness can survive anything, even the dark, even the past, even them. There are days now when my knees ache more than they used to, and my hands fumble with things they once held easily. Age comes slowly, then all at once. It doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, first in the mirror, then in the bones. And yet I welcome it, because growing old for someone like me feels like a kind of rebellion. I was never meant to. They didn't expect me to. They built that basement like a grave, but I walked out of it. And every wrinkle, every gray strand is proof of that. Sometimes when the air is soft and the light comes through the curtains just right, I sit in my favorite chair and think about what it means to have outlived your pain, not erased it, not undone it, but simply continued, moved forward with it in your pocket like a smooth stone. That's the thing they never told us. You don't have to let go to move on. You just have to carry it differently, not like a wound, but like a lesson. I carry so many now, lessons about how to breathe through fear, how to speak when your throat still trembles, how to build a home out of broken wood, how to sit with someone else's sorrow without trying to solve it, just to sit, to stay. That's the hardest part for some people, staying, but not for me, because I know what it's like to be the child left behind, to wait at the bottom of the stairs, straining your ears for footsteps that never come. I will not do that to anyone, and maybe that's why the young ones keep coming. Word spreads, I guess. Not quickly, not loudly, but quietly, like a whisper passed hand to hand. Go to her. She'll listen. They come with stories carved deep in their chests. Some speak, some don't, but all of them are looking for the same thing, a place where they don't have to explain the way they flinch. I give them tea, and time, and silence that doesn't judge. Sometimes they ask, "Aren't you tired of hearing it?" And I say, "No, I'm tired of people pretending it doesn't happen." That usually makes them cry, but it's not a broken kind of crying. It's the kind that comes when a dam has finally found a crack. I've learned how to hold that space, not with answers, but with steadiness, and it's not just young girls anymore. Sometimes it's boys, men, women in their 60s who have carried their secret for so long they barely remember what life felt like before it. They all sit at the same table, drink from the same chipped mugs, wrap the same worn blanket around their shoulders, and in that moment, they belong, not because their pain is identical, but because their need to be seen is the same. and I see them, just as I was finally seen. That, more than anything, is what saved me. Not justice, not revenge, but recognition. The moment someone looked at me and didn't look away, I remember that moment like breath. It came from a nurse, decades ago, when I was just beginning to understand that escape wasn't the same as healing. She saw me curled on a bench outside a clinic, hands shaking, eyes dull. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me and said, "You don't have to tell me, but you're not invisible. I see you." Those words cracked something open in me. It would take years for the light to fully reach inside. But that was the beginning. Now I try to offer the same. Not advice, not solutions, just presence. And I tell them, you are not broken. You are a mosaic. Every shattered piece, every sharp edge, you've turned them into art. And I see it. I see you. I always will. My chest before my eyes even opened, when the silence of the room reminded me too much of the silence in that basement, when living felt like a task instead of a gift. But I read it, and I stayed. And somewhere along the way, that small act reading my own words, believing them just enough, became the thread I followed back to myself, not the self they tried to erase, not the girl locked behind wooden doors and thick air, but the woman who walked out, the woman who grew older, who planted things, who made soup, who listened, who loved. Yes, I loved. Not perfectly, but fiercely. Not without fear, but despite it. That is my legacy, not the pain, not the silence, not the cruelty done to me. But this, that I kept the door open, that I welcomed others in, that I turned my story into shelter, and when I go, when my time finally comes, and the river calls my name, I hope they'll find that drawer. I hope they'll unfold that note, and I hope, wherever they are in their own story, they'll hear my voice, steady and soft. You made it another day. That is enough. Because sometimes enough is everything.